got a little bit of that Rut Tester tea sippers. Okay, we got Sandwick, max laps, max deformation. Gotta come in here and do a little Rut Tester video on this. Bro, I tell you what. Okay, let's see if old Spency boy pull a little hole shot on these boys real quick. All right, motherfucker just barely got me. Okay. I did soften up my suspension a little bit, because I'm probably going to need it if this gets as gnarly as I think it's going to get. I don't know if it actually will, though. We'll just have to see here. Okay, so kind of see what it's doing on the first lap. If you've never seen a Rut Tester video from me, basically what I do is I go through here and I show you the first like 3 or 4 laps on a track with the deformation, and then I skip like 5 laps ahead and show you the deformation, then skip another 5 laps ahead and show you the deformation, so you get a bit of a look at what it'll do over like a 20-30 lap kind of race scenario, but in a shorter period of time, you know what I'm saying? Man, they got to do something with this fucking, you know, like momentum robbing vibe that they got going on with their sand filling on Legends right now. She's a little too power robbing at the, once you start getting going, it just feels like you just can't build any real momentum on the track. And that is literally what made Sandwick on Reflex what it is. That and the terrain deformation, that's why we're doing a Rut Tester video here. I feel like, you know, if you talk about like Sandwick or like Sugar Ridge on Reflex, if you just took away that terrain deformation, those tracks really aren't what they're so praised to be, you know what I'm saying? It is Reflex having the greatest terrain deformation in any motocross game on those particular sand tracks. That's just what made those tracks so legendary back in the day, okay? So that's kind of the point of this video. Let's try to compare a little bit the deformation on the Sandwick on the Throwback track on Legends versus how it would be like actually back in the day on Reflex. And I've rode literally way more than 420 laps on the original Sandwick, I can tell you that right now. So Spency boy got an idea on what it does. Bro, that's like the shit that made me start doing like the super long races in these dirt bike games, was the terrain deformation specifically on those sand tracks on Reflex. By the way, y'all boys be sure and add me up on Epic at Spencer Turley, no spaces and no capital letters. I've been on there farting around on a little bit of the Fortnite OG shit. Yeah, just anybody can join up when I'm in there squadding up and shit. So add my Epic, Spencer Turley, no space, no capital letters. Hell yeah, boys. So, looks like the ruts are forming a little bit here. You can kind of see it going. Okay, so it seems to be making more like individual type deep ruts. Like I said, we do have the deformation on maximum right now. Alright. But yeah, certainly making more like, it's making more deeper individual style ruts than like on Reflex, for instance. We'll see if it kind of starts smoothing them down here a little bit, but see that whole area right there, it's like you just can't keep the same kind of momentum, and then it just slows you down. There's been multiple like milestone games in the past that's kind of had this sort of a vibe where you get going and it's like the bike just gets to a point where you're wide ass open, but the bike's not even moving. You know what I'm saying? Kind of gets like that a little bit. Even MX bikes had that problem going up hills. You know, you would kind of get where it would just like, the physics just, I don't know, the momentum and the physics just feel so weird when you're going up a hill slow. You know, it's like one of the hardest parts for these dirt bike game companies, which I think MX Bikes has kind of updated that a little bit, but, you know, seems like that's a really crucial, hard, difficult part. Yeah, that is definitely making more hardcore, like, individual ruts, which is not really what it does on a sand track, so that's kind of weird and interesting. That's just something I'm noticing, like, right off the bat. Why the hell's my cursor up in the top left corner? I don't know. Can't tell you, bro. All right. So this is definitely a totally different terrain deformation vibe than what you would have had on the original Sandwick. At least I can say there is terrain deformation, you know. Most of the milestone games, you can't even feel the shit. I don't know what's going on right there. I did that same exact crash in my video from just a couple days ago. I don't know what's going on. It's like if you land on the slightest little fucking like pre-made like bump, it just pops you off. It's kind of weird. Don't really know what's going on there, but yeah, definitely glad I softened up my suspension a little bit. You don't want to come into this with full-blown stiff suspension because it's not like you can get away with that on Sandwick on Reflex because it just kind of, it gradually makes that deformation, and it's not like super hardcore individual ruts. It just kind of slowly forms up like those bigger, kind of those bigger sand berms, you know? And I feel like that's more so what it does on a sand track versus like 7,000 smaller individual ruts. This is kind of, it's kind of starting to make it where it's like, very, you know, you'll kind of get deflected off of the ruts and stuff on the track, but we'll try to keep an eye on it here, see what it's doing. But if we go way outside here, like you just, I don't know, you can carry so much more speed on Reflex, it seems like, than what you're doing right here. This just, it kind of, you get limited, you know, you'll get, your momentum is limited in this game on these sand tracks versus how it is on Reflex. Oh, they do still have the cool little yellow, like, little tires and shit. That's kind of classical right there. Yeah, it's certainly deforming, almost maybe a little too much. I know that may sound crazy, but it's all in how the deformation is forming. That's what makes the difference, you know. Like, this right here is probably going to get a little bit jank. You know, you might not technically want to be running this on absolute maximum, but I just wanted to do it for this video, just fucking around, you know what I mean? But, like, it just all depends on how the terrain deformation system is in that particular game. You know, like, for instance, MX Simulator, you don't want to have that deformation very high, or it's just going to instantly turn into weird, janky, doesn't even look like real ruts, you know. Whereas, like, Reflex, for instance, it's kind of just like a preset value that you can't really change. You know, so you're not really in there sitting around adjusting the deformation setting. It just is what it is, and it's absolutely perfect on Reflex. Whereas like this right here, you know, you're going to get into this, the bike doesn't even want to get around the track because it becomes so insane. You know, it's like it literally, it turns into more of like an enduro kind of vibe than like a hardcore motocross terrain deformation kind of vibe. That's kind of the same thing that happens on MX Simulator when you got the deformation too high. It turns into fucking enduro cross real quick, whole squat on that real shit, you know. More so than just being like hardcore motocross ruts, you know what I'm saying? But it just all depends on how like cushiony the deformation forms and how, you know, rigid the deformation forms. That seems to make a really big difference on it. This is actually developing a little bit more rigid style ruts than what I would have thought it would have been doing on a sand track. Therefore, you might want to have it on like, you know, one of the lower deformation settings if you're wanting more of like a realistic kind of vibe, because this ain't really realistic right here. I mean, 5 laps in and it's like, you know, the bike is just like ricocheting off of every little fucking individual rut, you know, you're just barely getting around the track. That's something that was so cool about Reflex's Sandwick deformation, was even when it got super gnarly, you could still keep the same kind of speed level. You could still keep the same kind of momentum level. Sometimes even more. Like, you could go into those super hardcore, bigger, like, terrain deformed berms and shit, and you could actually go faster around the track. It, you know, when a deformation system just starts slowing down a track instantly, that kind of goes to show you one or two things. The deformation is not developing as good as it could, or you have it developing too fast. One of those two things is happening if it's just instantly slowing you down everywhere on the track. You know, a really good terrain deformation for somebody that really knows how to play the game should actually be making the track faster. You know, that's really what it should be doing. Yeah, it should add some roughness and some gnar, you know what I'm saying? We'll shred that gnar real quick, but like, it shouldn't be making it enduro. You know, there's a big difference in like terrain deformation gnarly, like what the original Sandwick was on Reflex. Like if you get to lap 20 on that, that's fucking gnarly, but it's not enduro. It's not like slowing your momentum down to the point where you feel like you're just crawling around the track. That's kind of what it feels like this is doing right here. I mean, you already were kind of crawling on the track. The momentum was already jacked up a little bit before you ever even put the deformation in there. But then once you put that on there, on top of it, then see that right there? I mean, why am I popping off on a fucking 15-foot sand, not even a double? Like, come on now. Come on now. Let's just say that there's still a lot of room for improvement here on Legends with the deformation and the sand momentum filling and all of that, you know. Okay, here we are on lap 10. All right, and I accidentally have my camera set on the actual Reflex chase camera, so we're back on the default camera right here on Legends. That was kind of making it feel a little weird to me there. I can see a little bit more of what I'm doing now, but I was curious to see if this was going to like start to smooth out the deformation a little bit, where you could actually start going faster on it again. It does kind of seem like it is doing that a little bit, but still, I'm just not getting the vibe like this is as soft and supple and sandy as it should feel. You know, it's almost like you have a sand track with like normal dirt deformation going on. You know what I'm saying? Kind of the way I would explain it right here. It's just like the bike, you can just tell is it's reacting too much. It's too stiff. The deformation is too stiff. It's got to be softer on a sand track. Now, it would be one thing if it was like this on a hard pack track or something. I might be able to understand that a little bit more, but not on a sand track. That's what's killing the vibe right here. That's what's making it not really like the Sandwick on Reflex. That was like some of the most softest. Look at how that's ricocheting the fucking bike. Oh, man. I mean, it's literally basically making the track unrideable. It's making it like janky. You know, you're starting to get into that janky range where it's just making a big mumbled, jumbled, fucking weird shit that kind of looks like deformation. You know, kind of not. This is exactly the type of shit it'll start doing, like on MX Sim if you got it cranked too high. It just makes it where you can't even really get around the track. You just start popping off random ass places. You know, so yeah, I was a little bit concerned about that, but it does seem like that is a bit of an issue. But this can be updated on Legends in the future, and I'm sure it will be, but that's been the biggest struggle with the Erode system on MX Simulator, the terrain deformation in pretty much any game past Reflex. The thing that they struggle with the most with it is to get it soft enough and cushiony enough. You know, like a little bit of that cush vibe, you know what I'm saying? That's the hardest part for these guys making these terrain deformations in these dirt bike games. They just can't get it cushy enough. You know, they can't get it soft enough where you can kind of go in and out of the ruts and kind of, you know, but they're still sturdy to a certain extent. Like I say, this is just more of your, like, kind of like you slap down, like, hard packed dirt style terrain deformation on a sand track. That's pretty much exactly what this is right here. Don't get me wrong, there's a couple spots that feel kind of cool and kind of good, and it does give you a little bit of that Reflex Sandwick vibe when you just get around to rut just right, but overall though, I think it's kind of making it more weird, little more on the hard packy side than it should be for a sand track, you know what I mean? And not only a sand track, but the deepest kind of sand track. I mean, Sandwick is basically replicating Southwick, You know what I'm saying? So you're wanting those kind of tracks to be the softest of any of the other tracks that you got going on, which without the deformation, it is pretty soft vibed, but the deformation is what's turning it into like this super hardcore, hard, rough, like, but not rough in a good way. You know, Sandwick on Reflex is rough in a good way. It makes that where the bike just starts gliding over it because it's soft enough, but it also still has that skill gap, and it still has that, you know, it's not like you're just not hitting anything on Reflex. You're still hitting deformation, but it's not super hardcore like, you know, random ass kickers everywhere, random ass little areas that'll just cause you to pop off and kind of feel like it's hurting the physics feeling of the game, you know, kind of like more like what it does on Sim when you have the deformation too high. That's kind of the vibe I'm getting a little bit right here, but let's try a little bit of first person action. All right. And I think, you know, particularly their Sandwick and Sugar Ridge track remakes are a little bit on the smaller scaling vibe. Their Pine Top felt really good to me, but that might have been because the Pine Top was like one of the biggest scaling tracks on Reflex, so naturally it's going to end up being probably the biggest scaling track within the Legends Throwback tracks, you know? So, but yeah, I think that's partially what's hurting their momentum vibe a little bit, because you can't really sweep these corners exactly like you would on Reflex right here, but yeah, just not quite as soft as what I was expecting. Not quite as cushiony as what I was expecting the deformation to be. You know what I'm saying? Swear to God, this game feels twice as good in first person as it does third person. That is super bizarre. I don't know why that's the case, but if you really sat here and fucking played this game and really started tuning your bike around this kind of deformation, yeah, you could start to get around it better, you know, but you don't really have to do that on Reflex. Like, you could hop on there on a stock bike on Reflex on Sandwick, and it's going to be a fun-ass time, you know. You're going to be able to get around the track. That's actually a good video idea, if I can max deformation Sandwick on a stock bike. We may have to try that, but nonetheless, this is pretty much giving you a good idea right here what it's going to do. It's making a lot of individual ruts. It is digging down in. It's not just making ruts on the top. It actually is digging down, like on some of these jump faces, you know. Like, some parts of it are good, but some parts of it, I feel like this deformation would be pretty good if it, like I say, if it was on more of a, like a hard pack kind of track, you know, something like that. But like on a sand track, I don't think it's fully capturing that sand track vibe kind of deformation. But like this right here is turned into a super kicker. So it's dug that down quite a bit. But yeah, I just think they need to do some more tweaks on their, you know, terrain deformation system in Legends, and they could have these sand tracks feeling way better. Because that's really is what makes a sand track what it is. You can't really have a sand track, you know, like Reflex style sand track without a really good terrain deformation. It just can't, those two things can't work together. You know, if it's going to feel like Reflex, it's also got to have a pretty damn good terrain deformation system on it if it's going to be a Reflex sand track remake. You know what I'm saying? So that's kind of what they're struggling with a little bit right here. Definitely let me know down in the comments what you guys thought about it. But yeah, for me personally, just a little bit too like that right there. I mean, you just won't crash like that on Reflex's terrain deformation. It just doesn't, it doesn't happen so quick and janky like, you know what I'm saying? Almost feels kind of buggy when you just instantly pop off randomly. It's not like a skill gap thing, it's like a buggy thing. The same exact way when you crank that deformation too high on MX Sim and you're running into like degenerated triangled terrain where it's literally not even properly developed terrain. That's what was so good about the deformation on Reflex, was that The deformation got super hardcore when you got through the laps on Sandwick, but it wasn't janky. It wasn't like weird and buggy feeling. That's what Reflex captured the best with its terrain deformation. That's when you know you have a good terrain deformation, is when you can run a shitload of laps on a track and the track looks like it's absolutely muffed up, motherfucking tore up, but it's not janky and weird and buggy feeling. That's when you know you have a good terrain deformation system. That's not how MX Sim is. That's not really how Legends is. You see what I'm saying? The only dirt bike game I know of that is like that is truly like that, where a track can get fucking gnarly but also not janky with the deformation, is Reflex. And that's why I say it still to this day has the greatest terrain deformation system of any dirt bike game out there, period. And it's not even close, bro.